Detective Jack Sullivan had seen his share of unusual cases in his 15-year career in New York City's homicide division. However, nothing had shaken him more than the seemingly straightforward case of a series of break-ins at a secluded townhouse in Manhattan. On a frigid January night, Jack received a call from an elderly woman named Mrs. Reed. She had been living alone since her husband's death. Her children moved out and living in different states. Mrs. Reed reported unusual activity in her house. Drawers left open, belongings shifted, faint sounds of movement, and the chilling sensation of not being alone. What terrified her most were the indistinct whispers she heard in the dead of night. Deep, husky whispers that sounded anything but human. Jack arrived at the eerily quiet street shortly after midnight. The old townhouse stood alone, surrounded by abandoned buildings, imbued with a sense of haunting loneliness that set Jack's nerves on edge. Inside, he found Mrs. Reed sitting in her dimly lit living room, frail and pale, clutching a small crucifix and waiting. As Mrs. Reed walked Jack through her house, she pointed out the evidence of intrusion. Drawers in her bedroom were askew, personal belongings tossed aside, and family heirlooms were not where she had left them. Yet strangely, nothing valuable had been stolen. She led him to the basement next, a place she confessed she hadn't ventured into for years. It was there that Jack felt an icy chill that had nothing to do with the winter cold outside. Something felt profoundly wrong. He decided to investigate further once Mrs. Reed was safe in the living room. As Jack navigated through the winding corridors of the large townhouse, he arrived at the entrance to the basement. The air around him grew noticeably colder, adding to the mounting sense of dread. The wooden stairs creaked under his weight as he descended, his flashlight cutting through the pitch-black darkness. The basement was expansive, cluttered with cobweb-draped boxes and old furniture covered in dust. The musty scent of damp and decay filled his nostrils. It was clear that this place had not been frequented for years. His flashlight beam landed on a peculiar sight, a loose wooden panel in the far corner of the basement. It looked out of place in the midst of the cobweb-laden room. The officer's intuition nudged at him, suggesting something was amiss. His hand reached out, his fingers brushing against the wood, feeling an unsettling coldness that did not belong. With a firm tug, the panel slid away, revealing a hidden room behind it. The sight that greeted Jack was a chilling tableau that would remain etched into his memory for years to come. It was a small space, reeking of mildew and neglect. A threadbare mattress lay in one corner, covered in grime. Old food cans were scattered around, an eerie testament to someone's sustained presence. But what truly sent a wave of horror surging through him was the makeshift altar in the corner. An array of photographs was carefully arranged on it, all featuring Mrs. Reed. In each photo, her eyes had been violently scratched out. This eerie detail turned the innocent pictures into haunting images of obsession and terror. A chill ran down Jack's spine as he examined the altar, a grim realization dawning upon him. This was not the work of a casual intruder or a homeless individual seeking shelter. This was a dangerous stalker who seemed to harbor a sick fascination for Mrs. Reed. Jack quickly dialed for backup on his radio, his fingers trembling as he relayed the unsettling discovery to his colleagues. He left the concealed room, pushing the wooden panel back into place. It was crucial not to disturb the scene further until the forensic team arrived. As he ascended the stairs, a profound sense of unease gripped him. Mrs. Reed's house no longer felt like just an old townhouse. It had transformed into a den of unseen horrors. Once upstairs, he found Mrs. Reed in the living room, standing rigidly with her eyes wide and her gaze fixed on the ceiling. Her face was ashen, and she held a trembling hand to her mouth. "He's here," she whispered, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack felt his heart skip a beat. The whispers she had spoken of weren't a figment of her imagination. They were terrifyingly real. A loud thud echoed from the floor above, followed by an ominous murmur that seemed to reverberate throughout the house. Jack, a seasoned detective, felt his blood run cold. The whispers Mrs. Reed had described were manifesting with chilling clarity. His pulse pounded in his ears as he unsheathed his gun, gripping it tightly in his sweaty palms. Keeping his gaze locked on the grand staircase leading to the upper floor, Jack motioned for Mrs. Reed to stay behind him. The stairs creaked under his weight, each groan of the old wood echoing in the tense silence of the house. As he ascended, the whispers grew louder and more distorted. They seemed to follow him, like an invisible specter, filling the house with their eerie resonance. The upstairs hallway was a narrow, shadowy corridor. Jack checked each room with meticulous precision, but they were all deserted. The whispers, however, continued unabated, as if taunting him, a dissonant chorus to the night's eerie symphony. Finally, he came to the last room at the end of the hall. It was an old nursery, its entrance slightly ajar. Mustering courage, he nudged the door open, stepping into the dimly lit room. The air was heavy with dust and decay, and the remnants of old wallpaper peeled away from the walls. It seemed untouched, a testament to the time when laughter and cries of a child filled the room. As Jack ventured deeper into the room, the door behind him slammed shut abruptly. The room plunged into darkness, and the whispers grew more intense, surrounding him like an invisible shroud. His heart pounded in his chest as he grappled with the doorknob, a sinking feeling of terror threatening to overcome him. "Mrs. Reed!" he shouted, pounding on the door. But there was no response. The only sound was the horrifying chorus of whispers that now evolved into a low, maniacal laughter. Jack felt a cold dread creep up his spine as he realized the grim reality of the situation. Just as suddenly as it had shut, the door swung open, casting a sliver of light into the pitch-black room. Jack stumbled out into the hallway, crashing into the backup officers who had just arrived. They quickly spread out to search the house, their faces mirroring the horror and confusion Jack felt. A thorough sweep of the townhouse yielded no intruder, just the chilling remnants of his presence. The forensic team arrived and busied themselves with dusting for fingerprints in the hidden room, preserving the haunting shrine to Mrs. Reed. Despite their efforts, the only evidence they managed to unearth was a set of fingerprints that matched no known criminal records. Despite the physical evidence of intrusion, the case was never resolved. The stalker remained elusive, like a phantom, leaving behind only traces of his unnerving obsession with Mrs. Reed. Jack could not shake off the memory of that night. The sinister laughter echoed in his dreams, and the fear in Mrs. Reed's eyes haunted his waking hours. In the aftermath, Jack was left grappling with the terrifying realization that sometimes the darkest horrors are not hidden in the realm of the supernatural, but exist in the cold reality of our world. They lurk in the unseen corners, in the shadows of obsession and madness, waiting to unfold their nightmarish tales. The case of Mrs. Reed served as a chilling reminder for Jack and his fellow officers that their duty often involved facing not just the everyday criminals, but also the inexplicable evils that lurk beneath the surface of normalcy. The investigation into the break-ins at Mrs. Reed's house lingered for several months, but eventually stalled and was declared a cold case. The stalker, whoever he was, seemed to have disappeared without a trace. Mrs. Reed moved out shortly after the incidents, unable to bear the haunting memories of her violated home. As for Jack, the case left a deep impression on him. It reminded him of the myriad forms that evil could take, often veiled behind the mundane or the ordinary. He continued his career in the homicide division, his resolve hardened by the haunting memories of the case. Throughout his future investigations, he carried with him the eerie recollections from that frigid January night. They served as a grim reminder of the dangers that lurk in the shadows, the unseen horrors that officers like him were sworn to confront and protect innocent lives from. Every creaking floorboard, every indistinct murmur in the quiet of the night, took him back to the dusty, forgotten room in the basement, the sinister shrine, and the phantom whispers, the chilling laughter that followed him from the nursery, the terrified look in Mrs. Reed's eyes, and the cold, nameless fear he felt were etched permanently in his memory. He knew that he would carry them with him until the end of his days. Thus concludes the unsettling experience of Detective Jack Sullivan. This story serves as a chilling reminder of the reality that sometimes the darkest horrors aren't supernatural, but are born out of the depths of human obsession, lurking in the corners of our very real world.